Greetings one and all, and welcome to another Dark Rider movie analysis. I am the Nightmare Rider, Major Mind, reminding you as always that even a cheeseburger could be deconstructed to its original source. Dracula is an unmistakable horror icon, Bela Lugosi's portrayal having become the archetype for vampires more than 80 years after its original release. While many rightly view this as a horror classic, rarely do I find people going into much analytical depth about how the film works, not just for the archetypes that the film created, but how effective these elements are in the context of the time period. A character like Dracula, as portrayed in the film, would not work today as an effectively menacing character, considering how cliché he has become. However, for 1931, Dracula was perfect for introducing an entire genre of horror fiction based around vampire lore. Throughout this analysis, I will be making comparisons to the book, although not to make value judgments as to which one is better. More so, it will be to highlight an early example of how much of the source material has to be adjusted to a different form of storytelling. When visiting foreign cultures, especially somewhere with an extensive rural community, a rundown castle wouldn't be an unusual sight, and so it lays the foundation for the creepy atmosphere that Dracula himself carries. Despite Bela Lugosi's hammy performance, within the context of the time period, Dracula isn't a character you would look at and immediately assume is a monster. Compared to the book, where Dracula is described as being an elderly man with a thin moustache and a pointed beard, Bela Lugosi actually doesn't immediately look a lot different to everyday humans. If you compare his outfit to our main protagonist in a formal setting, Dracula doesn't look out of place at all. Even with his deliberate mannerisms, he would at worst look like a creepy foreign count that doesn't have the best grasp on the English language. Van Helsing makes a comment that this is something I think a lot of vampire fiction in the modern era should adhere to. A vampire's biggest strength is that he is unassuming. Dracula does not make a dramatic show of his monstrosity. Instead, he hypnotizes individuals with his distinctive stare into doing his bidding, only feasting on their blood when their victims are secluded. When you consider how much of vampire lore wasn't common knowledge in the 1930s, it's easy to get an idea of how easy it would have been for a monster like Dracula to deceive people. In the book, Dracula is rarely directly seen. Instead, we see the results of his attacks long after he's fled from the scene. This is something that would not work so well in a film, so having Dracula a more conveniently young-looking person helps to intermingle without looking suspicious. Now, if you want to see a character who really has no inside voice, then look no further than Renfield. In the book, it is Jonathan Harker who first goes to visit Dracula, although this is another factor that would not work in the transition to film. Jonathan Harker cannot recognise Dracula if he is to remain sceptical of the existence of vampires. He almost becomes Mina's first victim when she is turned into a vampire herself, further showing that any one of us could secretly be a vampire. As such, it makes more sense from a film perspective to show Renfield's visit to Dracula and his ensuing madness to give us a taste of what a vampire is really capable of. Because Renfield is labelled as simply being crazy instead of being assumed to be anything supernatural, he's unpredictable, and left to his own devices can often lead Dracula to his next victim. His acting largely carries the film in absence of much special effects, which is something I think works in the film's favour. If you can look past the rubber bats on strings, the lack of special effects make the film more down to earth. Relying on the facial expressions make performances more believable, and so the more we as an audience feel there's a possibility of something like this happening in real life, the less suspension of disbelief is needed to accept the events in the film. The fact that Dracula's transformation into mists, bats and wolves are all happening off screen means that when he creeps up on characters to attack, he will not be noticed directly. Much like in the book, there are few places that Dracula cannot reach, and so unless you know the folklore methods for protecting yourself from vampires, it is likely you will never even notice that it was him visiting you until it turns you into a vampire and makes you his slave. One of the often forgotten characters in the film is Martin, Renfield's caretaker in Dr. Seward's sanatorium. He is the film's comic relief, usually treating Renfield as if he were a small child. I didn't expect it to be so funny how much of his own skepticism is one that is more bewildered, questioning if he is the only sane person left.
He's crazy.
They're all crazy. They're all crazy except you and me. Sometimes I have me doubts about you.
Yes.
The main piece of criticism I would give to this film would be the exposition of what happens to Lucy. The first half of the book is dedicated to Lucy's sleepwalking, leading her directly into Dracula's arms. Several times do we read about how Lucy very nearly dies from blood loss, leaving her friends and family to rush to make immediate blood transfers. Even without wolfsbane protection, Dracula finds a way to dramatically enter, ending Lucy's life. After we read about the mysterious child attacks that have been happening, the book actually depicts Van Helsing leading Jonathan to discover Lucy is now a vampire and so must slay her. Now, given the film's technical limitations, I can understand how they wouldn't have been able to fully depict Lucy's vampire powers, but at least showing her death as well as her resurrection as a vampire to Dracula would have made the horror more dramatic, since we got to see another vampire in action besides Renfield. The fact that they just mentioned Lucy's death without ever showing anything feels like an afterthought, quickly coming up a plot hole of a character who is absent for a large portion of the film. My absolute favourite character in the entire film has to be Dr. Van Helsing himself. Unlike some more recent depictions, Van Helsing is a badass in a quite subtle way. He is the ultimate adversary to Dracula, not through any physical skills or power, but purely through his knowledge of how a vampire works. He can match Dracula at every turn, knowing exactly what to look for that will expose the Count as a monster. He has an incredibly strong will and stoic determination, resisting Dracula's hypnotism, always preparing a countermeasure to keep vampires at bay. In the books, he is a very wordy character, often sympathising with the very difficult emotions that Jonathan and others would be going through with their loved ones dying in front of them. Even without this, he shows a great deal of patience for people's scepticism, waiting until the right moment to reveal evidence for Dracula's vampire nature. If a vampire's greatest weapon is ignorance, then it is knowledge that is far more powerful than any crucifix or wooden stake will ever be. Overall, Dracula has earned its status as a classic film, not just in horror fiction, but all cinema. It has a heavy atmosphere which makes Bela Lugosi much more creepy through just his body language and any of his famous lines. The human cast all react in a believable manner to the ensuing tragedies, saved only from the vampire's manipulation by Dr. Van Helsing, whose wit and focus play out a deadly game of mental chess against Dracula to cease the horror once and for all. While some of the omitted scenes from the book do reduce the overall drama, leaving one or two characters with far less importance than the overall story, the distinctive acting makes this one of my favourite films of all time. I give Dracula an overall grade of an A+ and an outstanding recommendation. A must-see for any fan of horror or early cinema, setting a legacy that would shape one of the most popular monsters in fiction for decades to come. Until the next time, this is the Nightmare Rider, Major Mind, riding out.